And they actually managed to do it. They did it for a very specific reason. Our such and such book in the index. Consequently, situations like the following have taken place. Saint Albert the Great. With the word great, do you know who was the influential theology professor of St. Thomas Aquinas in the year 1100? Who was an entire encyclopedia himself, hence the nickname the Great. The year 1550 arrived. They established the index and placed one of St. Albert the Great's books, already canonized, in the index of prohibited books. Why? Because it was a book about botany. And at that specific time, the church did not agree with certain scientific concepts about botany that perhaps had some direct relation to religion, to the human spirit, or to the eternal soul. And 500 years later, they put it on the index and it's still there. They put specific people onto the official index list who truly and rightfully deserved it. All those radical writers and influential philosophers from the era of the French Revolution, with their fierce and demonic attacks against the Holy Church, certainly deserve to be placed on the official index of prohibited books. Absolutely no one should have ever read that dangerous material. And with very good reason. There were other cases. Consider the fascinating case of Alexandre Dumas. I am not entirely sure if you are already familiar with who he truly is, but I will take a moment to explain it to you in detail. He was a highly celebrated French novelist and a prolific playwright, active around the mid-1800s, who famously authored a timeless literary work called, among many others, a masterpiece known as The Lady of the Camellias. This particular story remains one of his most enduring contributions to world literature. The plot, in a few words, was the story. It is a story about a young woman, let's say, a member of the demi-monde, living back in those historical days in the city of Paris, who found herself deeply involved with a talented tenor and a passionate artist during that vibrant era. The main character, the leading man, that's how they lived. At one point, the leading man's father didn't approve of the situation, so he went there and strongly expressed his disapproval. The young lady suddenly fell ill with a severe case of tuberculosis. She asked for forgiveness, the son asked his father for forgiveness, the father asked the woman for forgiveness, and she ends up dying in the arms of the leading man with the father there, and everyone forgives each other. Index to the index of forbidden books, because that's what it's presenting. A union without a clearly defined prior religious marriage cannot be shown. Index of forbidden books. Now this work, if it were produced with contemporary production techniques, and if they broadcast it across national television networks, easily, according to prevailing societal standards and customs, it could be aired during the highly regulated children's primetime slots. If they aired it during the time for teenagers, maybe it would bore them. Well, this was another example. Then it turned out that Giuseppe Verdi, the famous opera composer Giuseppe Verdi, created a timeless and tragic work. A masterpiece of an opera based on the celebrated novel The Lady of the Camellias, which became the very famous and beloved Traviata. Turned it into an opera, and it turns out that this one was not put on the index. You could listen to and even teach La Traviata, but you couldn't read the book. Afterwards, I could point out several such cases, but as I repeat, my intention is not to discredit or undermine what was done in those times. No, but that's historical. That's what happened. And I repeat, there were some works that, with all due energy, should have been put on the index. Later, when it came to putting or including someone on the index, there were several ways of doing it. The most frequently utilized method was to include one of the works of an author who had some significant controversial issues, or some notable errors, or particular specific elements that deeply offended the sensibilities of pious ears. But that didn't mean that everything else by that author was also on the index. There were very few cases in the history of the index where an entire author was included. So you couldn't read a certain book, but you could read another one by the same author. There is also another highly well-known case, the specific case of Antonio Rosmini. A remarkably similar situation occurred once again. He was the visionary founder of a religious congregation, and one of his scholarly books was officially placed upon the ecclesiastical index of forbidden books. Now, history has clearly shown that putting it on the index was because he forcefully called direct attention to the clergy of that time for the reprehensible and bad behavior of some of them, and for some external matters involving people who did not carry out their ministry honestly and uprightly, and so the index of forbidden books for Antonio Rosmini. Nevertheless, his congregation still endures, and no one is ashamed to be a Rosminian. This congregation isn't known here or in America, but in Europe, in Rome, the Rosminians are a congregation as accepted as any other. Nevertheless, the founder had a book on the index of forbidden books and nothing happened. The same is true for Faustina Kowalska. They put the book that spoke about it on the index, about the devotion to divine mercy in the way she presented it on the index. Another one? Louis-Marie Grignon de Montfort, now a saint and highly venerated, on the index. Why? Because that idea of slavery to Mary cannot be accepted. Time passes and he is canonized. Another one, Maria Valtorta, on the index. And as for the specific individual whom we are currently discussing, Luisa Piccarreta, her name was included on the index of prohibited books for the two particular volumes that had been published by other people, specifically because only those materials which had been made available to the general public could be officially put on the index. So for Luisa, they only put the two books that were published. Interestingly, one is The Hours of the Passion, published by Annibale Maria di Francia. The other, The Queen of Heaven in the Kingdom of the Divine Will, published by Benedetto Calvi. But as for the volumes, not a single one. As you know, Luisa wrote 36 volumes in addition to The Hours of the Passion, and also The Queen of Heaven, which does not strictly form part of the volumes. And the ones they included in the index were these two. So no volume was ever in the index. No one can claim otherwise. Then comes 1966, the Council. In 62-65 and in 1966, Pope Paul VI abolished the Index of Forbidden Books. It's not that he repealed the condemnations that were justly there, but he did abolish the index and the obligation to follow the index. No more Index of Forbidden Books. On the one hand, it truly seems to me that the established church, by having unfortunately abandoned this critical attitude of spiritual vigilance, has lost its way, which truly felt completely overwhelmed and burdened by the complexities of our modern, fast-paced times. Because just imagine for a moment, if the ancient Index of Forbidden Books had actually continued into today, how many thousands of people would have to work every single day in that massive, sprawling bureaucratic department, just to investigate, read, and judge every new publication? 200,000 books are published every day around the world. Back then, in Europe, how many books were published each year that were worth judging, that people actually read? Well, maybe 300 or 250, I don't know how many, or even fewer. But now, in 1966, 1970, how many books are published worldwide in a year? Millions. It would be practically impossible to read everything, to judge everything. This one yes, this one no. Furthermore, if that had truly and consistently been the established attitude of the Church, it would have inevitably had to modernize that specific department of the Index of Forbidden Books as well. Consequently, it would have been forced to create an entirely new department for various indexes, a comprehensive index of forbidden novels, another detailed index of forbidden CDs, and so on and so forth into the future. The index of forbidden songs, where Elvis Presley would have been with the very first one, and a lot of harm to young people would have been avoided, but things just don't work that way anymore. An index of forbidden magazines, where would the Church have ended up? We would have to work in that department. So, seeing already the practical impossibility of maintaining such a system, that formal attitude of the Church in that specific form eventually ended. But it still stands that each individual bishop has the solemn obligation to guide their faithful on what is right and what is wrong. But they do so no longer with that mandatory connection to the historical index of prohibited books. So it turns out that sometimes this doesn't happen either. So parish priests would be obliged to have their own index of forbidden things for what happens in their parish. And this also doesn't happen in most cases. And with things being this way, then parents would have to have their own index of forbidden things in their home. As a parent, we mom and dad put this behavior on the index. We put this magazine on the index. That is to say, we censor this, and here this is not allowed. But parents have also given up. And so now everyone just does whatever they want, and there is no well-defined morality to distinguish what belongs on the index and what doesn't, because there is no index anymore. Not from fathers or mothers. In fact, there isn't even an index for the parents themselves. Parents, both father and mother, should say, here the word divorce is on the index. Neither you nor I, that word is on the index. That word isn't even mentioned, under penalty of sin. But now, in our current time, there are no more indexes to speak of. In conclusion, what exactly am I trying to convey to you with all of this information? Well, my primary goal is to show you how things used to be with the official index, and how this specific matter of the now abolished index can significantly affect the future publication of Louisa's sacred writings. But we must consider the broader context of these changes. How do they make a fuss about this? Because it's the only thing they have. Back then, the Vatican didn't give explanations for why, as I already told you, it put a certain book on the index, except in very few cases. Luisa's case was no exception. It's simply an order included in the book such and such, written by Luisa Piccarreta from Corato, period, signed by the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith at that time, of the Holy Office, and then endorsed by Pope Pius X when it was put before him. A few days later, a detailed and critical editorial comment appeared in the Osservatore Romano, which remained notably unsigned, stating that a certain Luisa Piccarreta had been officially placed on the index of forbidden books because she was considered to be one of the many religious fanatics of these modern times, who, through her writings and claims, was under serious scrutiny, were so arrogant that any thought they had, they wanted to turn into a divine revelation just to stand out, and they felt compelled to, specifying the day and place, proclaim them loudly for all to hear. And that, furthermore, this specific way of practicing the hours of the Passion was considered quite exaggerated. That was the entire explanation I saw. And we, who know, and with everything I've told you, know that Louisa was not some fanatic who felt compelled to loudly proclaim what Jesus supposedly told her. In fact, it was exactly the opposite. First of all, the very first person Jesus had to convince that it was truly him was Louisa herself. Secondly, Louisa vehemently opposed, with all her strength, the public distribution and publication of her writings. And yet she is accused of the opposite. How many struggles? You must have read the chapters. The greatest pain they could inflict on me at this time is to release, to publish my writings. Only I, while still alive, have had to bear the pain of everyone finding out what happens between Jesus and me. Will you allow me this, Jesus? Oh, Louisa, wanting to hide yourself, do you want to hide me as well? In short, the comment they made was completely unfortunate. But since it was an unofficial comment that is not official, it has no validity either. But, well, we are finally coming to the end of this chapter. The index of forbidden books is actually no longer valid today. Historically, there were only 2 specific books involved, not multiple volumes, one of which was originally published by Annibale Maria di Francia, and then the complex story continues on from there. But as I was saying before, the very first person that Jesus had to convince that it was really and truly him was Louisa. How many times did she... Those of you who have read the volumes, don't you ask yourselves the same question? Oh my God, could it really be Jesus? Or is it just my imagination and my refined pride making all this up? Or maybe it is the enemy, the devil, who wants to make a mere toy out of me. Even in 1928, 1929, she writes, even though all the confessors and bishops have told me that if it is Jesus, yet I still have my doubts. At some point I doubted, but I was obliged to write it down. I still don't know if it's Jesus or if it's just my own inventions, and many years had already passed. Once again, Jesus gives her so many, or one more sign, because all those doubts that Louisa experienced were actually Jesus himself putting her in that position, so that later he could give her the answer and show her and everyone else that it was truly him. There are several points that, as I mentioned this morning, those who examined Louisa and followed her throughout her life conducted special tests on certain aspects or monitored certain points to be sure. And now he can elaborate on this for us.
Well, a variety of those specific tests or the profound effects of Jesus' visits were meticulously examined and thoroughly studied by her confessors in order to determine with certainty if it was truly the presence of Jesus. One of these, as Father Madrigal mentioned earlier, was the test of obedience, the obedience that lasted in Louisa throughout her entire life, simply so she could offer herself as a victim and remain in bed. Jesus told her to ask for obedience from her confessor. Otherwise, Louisa would never have stayed in bed as a victim. So from that point on, the test of obedience began. Later on, the same confessor put her through several tests. For example, once he ordered her that if Jesus came and appeared to her, she had to reject him and tell him that she did not have the confessor's permission to speak with him. At that moment, Jesus himself, also to prove that it was truly him, obeyed the confessor. He appeared to Louisa, and Louisa said, "Oh Jesus, look at what the confessor is asking me to do." And Jesus said to her, "My daughter, self-denial." 3 times Louisa couldn't believe it, but Jesus said, "Yes, it's a test they're asking of me, isn't it?" And so for 3 days, Louisa, with all the sacrifice of her soul in having to reject Jesus, until finally Jesus himself made the confessor understand that he would continue speaking with Louisa, that he had already given the proof, and that he would go on. Furthermore, and in this specific manner, there were also numerous and frequent other occasions, when the spiritual confessor strictly and explicitly forbade her from the act of dying. Out of obedience, just imagine, and Louisa already knew heaven. She had already been there. Sometimes Jesus would take her to heaven. That's where the mystical betrothals took place. And yet Louisa had to renounce heaven on several occasions, purely out of obedience, and continue living purely out of obedience. So, reaching that level of obedience was only possible with a very special grace from God. So that is one of the greatest trials there is, the trial of obedience. Yet another profound and difficult trial can also be found within Louisa's deep-seated and enduring love for her own suffering. By nature, we don't really like to suffer. We shy away from suffering. Louisa steadfastly endured her immense suffering with remarkable and unwavering patience for a period of more than 60 long years, reaching almost 70. Who gave her the strength? Imagination alone doesn't give you the strength to endure so much suffering. The devil, even less so. The devil, when he causes suffering, leaves behind despair, confusion, and other things, right? So for Louisa to have had all that patience, she never uttered a harsh word. Not a single act of impatience or rebellion, ever. So that's another one of the trials that throughout her life bear witness that it truly was Jesus. When Jesus spoke to her, he would say, "My daughter, suffering the cross is a treasure," and he would instill in her that love for suffering, that patience. So that's a sign that it was Jesus who spoke to her for so many years. Furthermore, throughout the extraordinary course of Louisa's earthly life, there were several remarkable prodigies and supernatural events that also serve as definitive proof of her sanctity, because a true miracle occurs specifically when the Almighty God intervenes with His infinite power to manifest His will in the physical world. Alter the laws a little. Natural ones in a given case for a certain period of time or something like that, right? So in Louisa's life, ever since she was bedridden, she never ate again, as has already been mentioned. What's more, Jesus told her, "Tell your confessor not to give you anything to eat ever again," meaning she was not to eat anything. But the confessor, out of obedience, told her, "No, you will eat at least once a day. I command you to do so with all my authority." So what happened was that Louisa ate out of obedience, but she would throw everything up and was not nourished by it. And what's more, she would throw it up whole. If they gave her a bunch of grapes, she would throw it up whole. There are testimonies. Benedetto as well, the one who knew my father, also testified to this. And witnessing this phenomenon did not cause any disgust at all. And as I was saying, not just for a certain period of time in this case, but throughout Louisa's entire life. The same thing happened with sleep. Louisa slept very little because at night she would first start writing, then her usual state would come over her body would become petrified, and if Jesus had not yet arrived, she would suffer from the deprivation. If Jesus did come, she would share her sorrows with him and spend the night suffering until the confessor arrived in the morning. Obedience would call her to recover her senses, and then she would continue with her day. But look, I remember that in some volumes, Louisa feels a bit drowsy. Not even asleep, she says drowsy, and it seemed very strange to her. "I, who have always spent the whole night accompanying you, suffering with you, that was my rest. Now why am I like this?" And it was because of matters of punishment. Jesus wanted to punish, or justice wanted to punish, and he would spare Louisa from participating in those sufferings. So also, consider what person could live for so many years without sleeping and suffering much more than an ordinary person. Because moreover, when Louisa was out of herself, Jesus would share his sorrows with her. He would communicate them to her soul. And it is said that she suffered greatly, but as soon as she regained her senses, her soul would communicate it to her body, and then she would feel her whole body in pain. For example, if she had suffered the crucifixion, when she came back to herself, she would physically feel the nails. And of course, out of spiritual modesty, she never allowed Jesus that is for them to be visible. Jesus asked her if it could be that way, and she replied, "No, Jesus, please, not that. I don't want to draw attention to this point." And Jesus advised her so. So you can see how in Elisa's life there were almost continuous miracles, which could be constantly tested, studied, and analyzed. And they never found anything strange about me. On the contrary, as has already been mentioned, those who studied her testified that this was truly the work of God. And also, as I was saying, when God intervenes with a miracle, it is to show that the truth is present, because God cannot act and demonstrate something where there is falsehood. It would be a deception from God, and God cannot deceive us. He is truth itself. So if there are miracles that have been verified and accepted, studied by the church, then it is the work of God. And the same goes for prophecies. In Louisa, there are many prophecies of punishments that would have to be fulfilled, some in those times, others later on, and many other things. Yes, Father Annibale, and this is mentioned in the first volume, he acknowledges the prophecy that Jesus told Louisa that Italy and Africa would go to war. And then the second war between Italy and Africa happened, and Jesus even tells her, in fact, tell the confessor that the one who will lose is Italy. And the confessor said, but how could Italy lose if Italy has weapons and the Africans do not? That's something else, isn't it? I don't think so. Well, Italy lost. So, proof of prophecy, how was Louisa going to know that? Only through divine revelation. And so in several, for example, also in the world wars, he prophesied them up to the atomic bomb in volume 21. In volume 21. Something related to that is coming. And many others that may not yet have been fulfilled. But that also proves that God intervened there, and it doesn't say how he knows. And that's to prove that everything else is also true, is from God.
Sure, but let's continue so you can see what happens. There are some negative elements, like this index thing. I would say it's the only one. And as long as they don't venture into those dangerous and unknown territories, no. Wanting to really know everything, just what we've said this morning with documents would be enough for them to say, no, this isn't something I can judge so lightly. It's not something where I can just read a little page and make a judgment. If there are judgments from so many people, as we've told you, so authoritative, and also those appointed by God to judge, along with all the bishops who oversaw it and all the confessors, and when her official ecclesiastical censor, Nicky Lorto, finally confessed his actions, and then, let's skip ahead a bit further, and he was eventually beatified while being fully aware of everything he said, really? In the face of all this overwhelming and undeniable evidence, who can truly make a rash judgment and say, no, I simply don't agree with that at all? It's incomprehensible to me. And anyone who goes public with such claims is truly reckless. It's someone who doesn't know everything that's behind it and limits themselves to a single page they read, and from that they create a false Jesus. It's truly astonishing that people can act this way with arguments that are more or less just the result of some influence. And that's how it is. Those who condemn and reject her, well, not condemn, let's say reject her, have never read anything. And there is no need to trouble yourself to investigate so many different things, and among many others. Because not just here, but in other places as well. Of course, it's the same story. That's why we're sharing everything that's going on here with you, and we'll continue later. Louisa dies, and things are left exactly as they are. Everything falls into a deep sleep as the years go by. But God still had his ace up his sleeve. It seemed like everything was dead, and that no one remembered Louisa anymore. And since the Holy Father Annibale had already established a religious congregation well before his first meeting with Luisa Piccarreta, which is known as the Rogationist Fathers of the Heart of Jesus, those fathers who are not well known here. In America, I think they have houses in Brazil and in the United States. And in Italy, the Rogationist fathers are very well known. At that time, Father Annibale was captivated, as happens with all founders. Some part, some phrase from the gospel. So what captivated him in a special way from his youth, as he wrote, was praying to God to send workers to his harvest, for the harvest is plentiful and the workers are few. Pray. That's why they are called the Rogationist Fathers, because they based themselves on that point, and that is their charism. At that time, when they were approved, in Rome, the congregation of the Rogationists, before Father Annibale met Louisa, Pope Pius X said to Father Annibale, "Since your congregation is so closely tied to this, the first Rogationist must be me." Okay, making it clear that the first one who must pray for vocations and for God to send workers to his harvest is the Pope. He says, yes, I will be the first Rogationist. So, the congregation was founded, time went by, Father Annibale met Luisa, did everything we've already seen he did, and then the moment of his death arrives in 1927, and as time passes, the congregation begins to prepare the dossier for the beatification cause of the founding father. When considering the situation at this particular point in time, I have absolutely no hesitation or difficulty in stating clearly that the Rogationist fathers deliberately tried to conceal or perhaps keep positioned somewhat obscurely on the sidelines the deep spiritual relationship that Father Annibale had with Louisa, as well as the specific publication he made of the hours of the Passion, primarily because they firmly believed that bringing this matter to the forefront, or even mentioning it at all, would represent an entirely insurmountable and impossible obstacle to overcome. The fact that a book published by the founder ended up on the index of forbidden books is enough for them to never want to ratify it. So let's just try not to mention any of that. We can also mention the significant and profound spiritual relationship he had with Melania, the visionary and chosen seer of La Salette, whom Father Annibale graciously welcomed and provided refuge for, after all of the events that transpired at La Salette, located within the city of Altamura, where he lived with the specific purpose of allowing her to serve as the novice mistress for the dedicated female religious branch of Father Annibale's foundation. And Melania went to Altamura, entered Father Annibale's convent, and became the superior and novice mistress, the very same Melania of La Salette, who later died in Altamura, where her remains are still kept. Just look at the kind of people he was involved with. Father Annibale, well, after Father Annibale died, things continued. The cause was opened in Rome. Everything about Father Annibale was approved because of all the work he did, but without mentioning Louisa at all. It reaches Rome. As the years pass by, they officially grant their approval for the beatification of the Blessed Father Annibale. The congregation, as for what the esteemed Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith has to say on the matter, no. There is absolutely nothing on my part that would hinder this beatification. Why, Cardinal Ratzinger, serving at that time, and the members of the Congregation for the Causes of Saints, both expressed the same sentiment. There is no obstacle whatsoever to the official canonizing of Father Annibale. And not only that, but they also formally present a documented miracle to support the case, performed for a young man in Brazil through the intercession of Father Annibale. And the Church officially recognizes and validates that miracle as a genuine and divine intervention, because for a beatification to take place, there must be a documented miracle, so that in some way heaven confirms to the Church that he truly was a devout and holy servant of God, and the Holy Father may then formally grant a dispensation from the requirement of miracles in order to ratify someone, but that was not the case with Father Annibale. The miracle was presented, and the Church recognized that miracle as an intervention from heaven. And that's how things stood in 1990. However, this was all the way back during the year of 1985. I had the grace, and I would even say the miracle, because sometimes people have asked me, hey, hasn't God ever performed a miracle for you? And truly, the greatest miracle of all was that he placed within my own diocese a remarkably holy bishop. Well, he is actually still alive today, so it is perhaps a bit much to say that so publicly. But at the very least, one can certainly say he is exceptionally wise and deeply prudent in all his ways, who was kind enough to listen to me. As I carefully told him every single detail I had gathered about Louisa and explained exactly why I had started doing those translations and some independent publications without anyone's support at that time. Guizar, Ricardo Guizar Diaz, whose letters of approval you may have seen in the books. He listened to me, took things seriously. He fully comprehended exactly how things clearly stood during that period. I'm specifically talking about the year 1990. At that time, providentially, he was in charge of the Theological Seminary section, operating under the auspices of the official Mexican Episcopal Commission. And in October 1990, a synod of bishops dedicated to vocations and seminaries was to be held. This was going to take place in October of 90. And the one from Mexico, the representative of the Mexican Episcopal Conference, was to attend that synod. Before this, well, I'm talking about, this was going to be in October of 90. Prior to these events, Monsignor Louisa, who was already deeply aware of the specific case regarding Louisa, had personally undertaken a formal visit known as the Ad Limina, or more formally, the Ad Limina Apostolorum Tagudi. This is a significant pilgrimage and report that every single bishop is required to make to Rome every 5 years. He had completed this particular journey during the months of October or November in the year 1989. And during that specific period of time, he took full advantage of his official visit to the city of Rome to travel specifically to Corato. Now let me take a brief moment to pause here in order to point out the very striking difference in the overall attitude presented. A bishop who takes an interest and even goes to Corato to investigate, and not a bishop who just said, no, not this. That's why I tell you that God worked that miracle for me, and that miracle extends to all of you, because these letters from Guizar come from that miracle. So the esteemed Monsignor Guizar travels to the town of Corato, and it was during that specific time that he meets with Monsignor Carata, who was serving as the previous bishop of the diocese. He learns who Louisa is, goes to Louisa's house, goes to Louisa's bedside, examines the writings, everything he wanted, and then returns to Rome, and then returns to Mexico and tells me, José Luis, I want for you to go speak with Cardinal Ratzinger. I am going to personally compose a formal letter of introduction for you, so that he will receive you into his presence, allowing you to go and speak directly with him regarding this specific matter. Because the aspect that truly astonishes and mystifies me the most about this is that this treasure is currently hidden deep within the church and is entirely unknown. He wrote me a letter of recommendation to open the doors for me so that Cardinal Ratzinger would receive me. I'm talking about May of 1990. My wife and I went. And so, in an effort to avoid making this story far too detailed, I eventually arrived at the main office with the secretary to try to formally arrange a professional appointment and an interview. And he simply said to me, look, he carefully read the entire letter and all that, but he told me it's just completely impossible. If you schedule an appointment for the day after tomorrow at 11 in the morning and the Archbishop of Paris arrives 5 minutes earlier without an appointment, of course the Archbishop of Paris is going to go in. And if the Archbishop of Paris shows up and then a certain secretary from the Fury arrives, as he emerges from the Flero, it is almost certain that he will proceed directly inside, and you will be left sitting there alone. I will personally make an inquiry to the Cardinal to see if he might be willing to receive you. Immediately following the conclusion of the Holy Mass, he is currently celebrating within the sacristy. There is no phone, there's no line, there's no one waiting for you. All right, fine, I trust you, I'll come tomorrow. Yes, come tomorrow. Come back the next day, yes. The cardinal will be away for a few days, but he returns on the 26th, if I remember correctly, of May. Who is waiting for you at the Mass? And after the Mass, you have the meeting, right? Well, thank you very much. So there was a free week, and to make the most of it, I went to Corrado because I thought I would have the meeting and then go to Corrado, but no, it happened the other way around. First, I went to Corrado, and some curious things happened there as well. Monsignor Corrado came out. They found out that I already had the appointment. They left when I told them I had the appointment with Cardinal Ratzinger and everything, the papers I was carrying, the writings of Louisa, etc. And Mons Carata, up until that moment, I didn't know they were going to ratify Father Daniel. So Mons Carata also gave me some copies of offerings that had been written, and he told me, you tell Cardinal Ratzinger everything you say, and you save this for the end. About how it's possible that they're going to beatify Father Annibale if he was also on the Lord's Index. Well, that's for sure. Another quite curious thing to consider is that over there in the town of Corato, they had actually spent many long years diligently trying to locate or obtain a physical copy of the Hours of the Passion, which had been translated into the German language. And they had searched everywhere. The day I arrived in Corato, after years and years of searching for that copy, a copy of the Hours of the Passion translated into German arrived by mail from someone who had found it in a library in Monaco and simply said, well, I'll send this to Corato. And they sent it to Corato. That same afternoon, we took tactical photos of the German copy so we could survive and present it to Monsignor Ratzinger in German, because he is German. Well, I don't know if this is getting too long, because, well, I eventually returned with that specific assignment, and then I went to attend Mass at 7 o'clock in the morning, located in the small chapel of what is commonly called the Teutonic College, which is situated deep inside the walls of the Vatican. Mass ended, and I had to gather my courage. We stood up, my companions and I, and we followed him into the Christina house using all the influence we could muster. After he had completely finished the process of undressing and carefully taking off all of his formal vestments and sacred ornaments, I slowly approached him. She was fully aware that I was going over to him. I honestly thought at the time that I was just going to offer a respectful greeting, perhaps just a very quick hello. So I began talking to him about Don Luis, saying, Your Eminence, the primary reason I am here today is to speak with you about Luisa Piccarreta. The bishop of my own diocese specifically sent me here to see you. And I continued on with the explanation. I handed him a selection of chapters, the ones at the beginning of the book that talk about the importance of the writings. It was about 25 typewritten pages, and I gave them to him. He said to me, Well, but had you never heard of Luisa Piccarreta? Sir, well, she was an Italian, etc., the story you already know, who lived here in the South and wrote 36 volumes, right? About living in the divine will. No, I didn't know. So where are the writings, or what? Well, you have the writings. What? Well, I mean, not you, but here in the archives of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. They were collected at that time, etc. And a select few of these specific works, no more than 2 of them, were officially listed on the index. And he responded to me quite literally, suggesting that perhaps they hadn't examined them with enough detail. And I said, well, maybe, sir, but to me, Your Eminence, it seems rather that it just wasn't the time when the Lord wanted them to come out. However, it seems to me that the time is now, and we kept talking there for a bit, almost reaching the end, when he said, now I will tell you what Mr. Carata told me. He said, by the way, Your Eminence, the books I told you about that were studied in the index of Luisa Piccarreta were not published by her, but were published by Father Annibale Maria di Francia, who is going to be ratified, and they were on the index. And I'm not exaggerating when I say he turned pale. He was truly moved. Like, what are you telling me? I said, yes, the books, the works of passion, these that you see in German, look. Hannibal of Madrid and France in German. Hey, this is on the index of banned books. It was. Just as I mentioned previously, he suddenly became quite pale, by the way. He is an exceptionally remarkable individual. Considering the remarkably patient and deeply respectful kind of person he has always been, he listened to my words in the exact same devoted way that my own children or any of you typically do whenever you truly pay close attention to me, maintaining a state of complete, unwavering calm and carrying a profound, visible sense of genuine pride in the shared moment. When I told him that, I noticed. How did he react? And in that moment, did he suddenly see a whole new picture and wonder what's going on here? I have already given my null testimony for the beatification, and now it's been presented to the congregation for the causes of saints for beatification. The Pope has already signed the decree of beatification, and now it turns out that he was on the index. He said to me, "Tell me more, go on, tell me more." So I explained to him how things had happened in a few words. I was with him for a while, let's say about half an hour. I handed him the writings and he said, "This is providential because tomorrow I'm leaving. I'm going to have 10 days of vacation in Germany and I'm going to take advantage of it because I have no commitments and can really get into this matter." Absolutely. Well, he had 6 months ahead of him to thoroughly examine everything. What if there really were serious or heretical things in the books published by Father Annibale and they were going to correct them? He had to make sure no matter what. It wasn't that I was asking His Eminence, "I beg you to read." No, it was God who put him between a rock and a hard place, as if saying, "Now read." What seems like just a story over time will be seen as a miracle, an incredible mercy of God, a direct intervention. Afterwards, he had to read, and I said goodbye. See you later, see you later. I went to the Piccarreta Museum, informed them of everything, and everyone was very pleased with the outcome. I returned to Mexico. We told Guisa about it, and he said, "Send His Eminence more writings from Guisa. Above all, make a selection of chapters that show a bright future for the church." Because the church in the areas, that is in the higher ranks, does not see a clear future, but rather a very dark one. I was advised to send him several specific chapters where a bright and hopeful future is clearly shown, according to the extensive writings of Louisa. And so, I promptly and directly dispatched these other chapters to Cardinal Ratzinger, personally, which he received in full and for which he graciously sent me a formal acknowledgement receipt card along with his apostolic blessing. You are more than welcome to see it for yourself if you want. Time passed, 6 months went by, the synod arrived, and Monsignor arrived. Guizar came to Rome and didn't know what it was about. He already knew everything about Father Annibale and the case, as you can see, and about Corato. He arrived and told me, and I was absolutely astonished. I arrive in Rome, and the first thing I find in my room is the invitation to the beatification of Father Annibale. It was on Sunday, the 7th of October, he was present there. And then he told me. I thought to myself in that moment, the only person who truly knows what is happening here is me. It ended. The ceremony ended, days went by, and he went to see Mons. Ratzinger, after all that transcendent moment, he had a meeting with him. And then he confessed to me, well, confessed is just a way of saying it, right? He informed me personally, saying that he had already engaged in a deep conversation with Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. He further explained to me that they have thoroughly read through every single one of the documents and concluded that all of Luisa's extensive spiritual writings must be officially approved by the authorities. I obtained it. Out of 90. Honestly, that's not in writing. But for me personally, I don't need anything in writing, except for what I just told you. As a direct consequence of those circumstances, Monsignor Guisat has been extraordinarily willing and entirely open to providing every single one of the historical letters I've asked him to give for the completion of these books. Because he has that support, Just imagine the reluctance of the current bishops, as the lady was telling me a moment ago, and there are thousands like that. How is it possible that someone like Monsignor Guizard is willing to approve everything? Is he reckless? Is he ignorant? Is he overzealous? No. Who knows what kind of support he has from above? This is precisely the reason why everything can be handled smoothly and efficiently, ensuring that the entire process proceeds exactly as planned without any unexpected problems. He gives the broadest recommendations. I don't know if you have read this one. I don't know if you appreciate it or recommend it. I don't know if you've already read this letter that's in this book. I don't think so, because it hasn't circulated much here. Ricardo Guizar Diaz, Archbishop of Tlalnepantla. In Mexico, there are, let's say, 100 bishops, of whom 13 are archbishops. One of them is Ricardo Guizar. Ricardo Benítez Ardiaz, Archbishop of Tlalnepantla. I consider the happy initiative of my good friend José Luis Acuña to be very worthy of praise and recognition. Forgive me for having to be mentioned here. We didn't tell him to include me. To publish it in Spanish. In this volume, there is a well-crafted selection of beautiful texts by Luisa Piccarreta about the Blessed Virgin Mary in the Kingdom of the Divine Will. The kind reader will find in these pages a splendid wealth of illustrations and meditations, and a wide range of reflections and perspectives about the maternal mission of the Blessed Virgin Mary towards us, her children, in relation to the divine will. May these texts enrich and nurture the filial relationship of many souls toward the Mother of Jesus and our Mother. This is truly ours. And may she herself graciously condescend to secure and obtain for her children a significantly more abundant and generous share in her sacred and eternal spiritual inheritance of blessings and heavenly goods. Tlalnepantla, February 26, 1999. The first letter she gave me was for the Fairies of the Passion in January of 91, after everything I just told you, and you can verify it there. As the years continued to pass steadily by, I found myself constantly jumping from one place to another until the year 1994 finally arrived, and it was then that this specific official decree was formally issued in the city of Rome. On the 25th day of February in the year 1994, just 3 years after the beatification of the Blessed Father Annibale, from Rome, Congregation of the Cause of the Saints. Declaration. The Congregation for the Cause of the Saints declares that on the part of Saint Cecilia, not the host, there is no obstacle to initiating the cause of ratification of the servant of God, Luisa Piccarreta, always according to the directives that are written and attached to the most excellent and reverend Monsignor Carmelo Casati, Archbishop of Trento. All other matters and rules that must be observed according to the law must be respected in every way. Given in Rome, at the Holy See, by the same congregation, on February 25th, 1994. After all the detailed accounts I've shared with you, the process of beatification, the deep investigation, and everything Father Daniel emphasized when he said, "This is truly from God, this is from God," the inclusion in the index, the subsequent removal from that index, and every single detail in between. This surprising conclusion is ultimately what comes out. Would any of you be able to take a moment to guess what the official stance and position of the Catholic Church is, specifically in regards to the life of Luisa? Why do you need to guess? Isn't it clear? Back in November of 1994, she was officially removed from the legal cause. Some of you who are here today were actually present during that time. And since then, as I mentioned to some of you yesterday, it has continued. Every single one of the written documents is currently being prepared in a highly legible, organized, and extremely practical manner, so that the appointed theologians or the specific officials who are currently in charge can have unrestricted and immediate access to all the writings, and thoroughly examine them to see if the guide made a mistake or not. No, that no longer exists. It's simply so that the process can continue. And as Cardinal Ratzinger said, Your Excellency, everything regarding Luisa must be approved. If I didn't have these words, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you.
With this, we'll finish for now, because otherwise the cassette will run out and the complaints will come to me. But anyway, very interesting things. Of course, I may have left out many things that happened, but I have given you the substance, and most importantly, and as St. John says, I saw it, I lived it, I saw it at the hour of death,